Woohoo! There you go. He's going to be moonwalking. Oh, yeah. Wash this guy off the head. Wash him off. There you
go. Good morning. Good morning, Timothy. Good morning,
to
Maya.
Everybody
who is listening to us in Clubhouse and watching us on LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook. This is the 140th episode of Japanese Politics One-on-One with Timothy being here every Sunday morning without running away. So this is, I'm sorry, I have to be serious with that. Thank you very much, Timothy, for joining us today again. As you already know, Timothy is the CEO of Langley Esquire, the government relations consultancy in Tokyo, and he has been polite and very kind to actually come this way again and be with us today. So, Timothy, without any further ado, the floor is yours. There is a lot going on.
Yes, there is. Thank you very much, Maya. Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for tuning in to Japanese Politics One-on-One. This is, like Maya said, our 140th consecutive Sunday together. So that's a pretty big deal. I mean, 140 episodes is pretty significant in itself, but this is every goddamn Sunday. So thank you very much for your encouragement, for your support, Maya, for your strong arm in keeping this going so consistently, and I'm really very proud of what we've been able to achieve. And the audience just keeps on growing. Let me remind you that next week is Election Day, the 22nd, when I do my next briefing. It is Election Day here, but I am also going to be offsite. I won't be in my gorgeous downtown home office, but I will be at the Akalenga, the red brick warehouse in Yokohama, where the automobile club that I belong to is having a extravaganza. Maybe 60 cars of various vintages of Rolls-Royce and Bentley will be occupying the promenade between the two brick warehouses. We've got that reserved. We do that once a year. And so I need to be there and ready and prepared with my car at 8 o'clock. So I will be giving my briefing from the Brickside warehouse next week. It'll hopefully be as crisp and as informative as these tend to be, and I hope to stay with that. You know, Maya has reached out to a couple of our more fervent audience members and asked for what they like about the show, what they don't like. And the recurring comment, I mean, besides the one of why don't you change the host, is, keep it snappy, keep it really relevant to what's going on in Japanese politics, and try and come in at 30 minutes. And the real beef of the briefing is on the one-on-one portion, the Q&A portion. So we've been trying to tighten that up over the last couple of episodes, you might have noticed. So I'm going to run through that as quickly as possible today, today's agenda of what's going on in Japanese politics that's of really critical contemporary importance to you. And then let's focus on the Q&A and try and keep it at maybe 90 minutes, which was one of the recurring requests from the audience. So let's get right into it. So if you've been following the press, as I know most of you have, the Unification Church is beginning to boil up to the top of the plate right now. There's a lot going on there. There was a meeting last week with the Culture Ministry, basically suing the Unification Church for their intransigence in responding to the questions that have been proposed to them. This has been going on ever since the assassination of Shinzo Abe 2 years ago. And it continues now. And there is a clamor among the Japanese population to get these guys. You know, they're like Om Shinrikyo. They're an illicit religious organization. It's a little bit more difficult than that, but I'd like to get into that a little bit more later on. I want to just tell you about what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about Munio Suzuki, who was a very prominent member of Ishin, but a very influential figure in Japanese politics over the last 30 years. And he was kicked out of Ishin just this last week. I'd like to talk a little bit about that. The Kishida administration is really dealing with the problems of declining number of people who are in the workforce and the amount of demand for workers to be coming up. So you've got the creation of the silicon factories, the chip factories in Kyushu and in Hokkaido that need workers, high-level skilled workers to go there. But you've also got the expo and a lot of other things, major construction projects that are going on. And this is really beginning to impact. The LDP has passed a law last year that goes into effect in April to reduce very strictly the number of overtime hours that workers can submit. So what that means is, although because of the declining number of workers in the workforce, people have been required to spend more time in overtime work, the government has come in and forcibly said you cannot work more than, for example, 120 overtime hours a year. And a lot of these companies, a lot of these workers are logging in at 230, the truck drivers, for example, bus drivers. So the Japanese government has come in and said, you can't do that anymore. That kicks in April, and that's already beginning to offer repercussions as it is right now. And it's a pretty big issue for the prime minister. He's attempting to address that. Japan-South Korean relations seem to be really moving in an uptick. The number of visitors from South Korea to Japan has really, it's 20 times more than it was this time last year, if you can imagine that. More than 500,000 visitors from South Korea have visited Japan on tourist visas over the last year. This is just really incredible. The airlines have increased the number of flights, daily flights from Incheon to Hokkaido, Chitose, increase, and there are three times weekly into Narita and Haneda. And it just seems like the relationship between South Korea and Japan is beginning to really take hold. There was a three-way talk between the foreign ministers of Japan, South Korea, and China 2 weeks ago for a possible meeting with the premier of China sometime, maybe this year. I think the prime minister is really pushing for that. As you know, his forte is in foreign policy. He'll be working on that. Also, the United States is working hard to get President Joe Biden with Z as well, probably in maybe in California. There is a meeting coming in before the end of this year. So really things are beginning to move in a lot of different areas. And it's not just because of what's going on in Ukraine or in Gaza, but there are a lot of other things that are going on. And I think it has been reported just the exhaustion of what's going on in Ukraine with the people who are supporting that and feeding a lot of money into that conflict there. The Defense Ministry is pushing much harder now to bolster Kyushu as a defense mechanism. So they're moving stealth fighters purchased from the United States to be in Kyushu. So this island chain starting from actually south of where Okinawa is and running all the way up to Kyushu is now becoming more unified in a defensive posture against possible incursions or maybe kinetic moves by China towards Taiwan. But there's a lot going on there. Having 35 stealth fighters, the top class fighters of the United States stationed in Kyushu is a pretty big deal. And positioning of forward forces and ammunition depots there is continuing at a very rapid pace. And so that continues on. Snap election, as we have discussed here, seems unlikely. I guess people in the government are watching this show too. It looks like it's really unlikely for there to be a snap election. It doesn't make much sense in any event. There's too much going on. There is, like we said earlier, an election, a by-election on next Sunday for an upper house seat and for a lower house seat. Then there's the extraordinary diet session that starts 2 days before that. And then that will go on. There's going to be a supplementary budget that is launched. Then there's the meeting of ASEAN here in Tokyo that the prime minister really wants to do well at. And so I think trying to orchestrate a snap election before the end of the year is just illogical, unnecessary. It just wouldn't produce the results that the prime minister is looking forward to. And as you might have followed, GG Press puts the prime minister's approval rating at about 26.3% currently, and it's been below 30 for the last 3 months, and it doesn't show any signs of improving. The prime minister reshuffled his cabinet, as you recall, maybe 3 weeks ago, in the hope that it would bolster his approval rating with 5 women in his inner circle, including the cabinet and the LDP leadership. It really didn't do much of a bump. It's the largest number of women that have been in the leadership. The last time was in 2014, and the prime minister's hope for getting a better approval rating just didn't materialize, and probably that's because in the lower level, so there's the ministerial level and the LDP chief honchos, there are 4 positions there. At the second level, the vice minister level and below, there were no women there. So it does look just a lot like window dressing without a lot of intention to actually deal with the issue. So he's got that to contend with. And in fact, OECD once again has announced that Japan's gender gap continues to widen, even in spite of the efforts being pushed by the prime minister. The gender gap includes not just the number of women that are in the workforce, in executive management, in the parliament, but also the pay that they receive. There's a huge disparity there, and that was focused on by a report that was just released this last week. So that's important too. I'm going to talk a bit more about that. The expo in Osaka, it's about a year and a half away. Tickets go on sale next month. In advance of that, you purchase them at an advanced discount when you purchase them so much in advance. But they expect to have, several million people travel there, and a good portion, maybe 5% of the people who will be visiting the expo will be from foreign countries. It looks a bit iffy. There are only 2 countries that have secured a pavilion in the class 1 type building. That means they submit their architectural plans and they build it using the forces of contractors in Osaka, building materials provided there as well. With only 2 that are secured now, the Minister of Economy and Trade has visited the site and has pronounced that more are in the pipeline. They're coming in. They're just waiting to submit their applications. He was very explicit about that last week, but it could be just window dressing because it hasn't quite materialized. So a lot of people are holding their breath about that. And once again, we've got the issue with the rising costs for men and material. And Sapporo just withdrew its application for hosting the Winter Olympics in 2034. So the mayor of Sapporo visited the prime minister's office just this last week to formally announce that they would not be bidding for that slot, in 2030. But maybe in 2034, they might make a bid for it. So it does have repercussions to what's going on in Osaka. And one of the proponents of the Osaka Expo, the governor of Osaka, in fact, suggested to the central government, there's this tension, as you understand. Osaka is dominated by Ishin, and the central government is dominated by the LDP. And there's this tension between Osaka and Tokyo for what's going on at the expo. So it could benefit the LDP and diminish the rising popularity of Ishin if the expo doesn't do very well. The governor has asked the central government, asked the prime minister, the number of workers that are being devoted and perhaps released in Hokkaido should be redirected to Osaka so that we can kick this thing off and make it really a success for Osaka and for Japan. And I think the prime minister is thinking the success for Osaka doesn't quite benefit me. Let me think about that. So there's a lot going on the labor front and on the materials front. Also the yen-dollar exchange rate and the balance of trade that Japan is suffering from as a consequence of that. the Abe faction leadership. If you're following either Maya or me on LinkedIn, we always promote our next briefing maybe on Friday afternoon with a little bit of a tickler about what we're talking about, what we're going to talk about. And in my tickler on Friday, I said that there was maybe some good information coming out about the Abe faction leadership. And specifically, that is the Speaker of the House is Mr. Hosoda. You might remember that Mr. Hosoda was the leader of the Abe faction. He was the leader of the Abe faction when Mr. Abe was prime minister, and he remained during the Suga administration as well. And then he was elevated to Speaker of the House. That's a very big deal, usually at the end of somebody's career. Mr. Hosoda is in his late 70s. And so he went from being the leader of the Abe faction to being the Speaker of the House, bolstering his position and bolstering the power of the Abe faction. In fact, Diet rules require the Speaker to relinquish their membership in any factional politics, so any factional relationship. So he distanced himself from the Abe faction as a consequence of that. He announced, and actually we've talked about this very quietly because it wasn't public information, maybe until just this last week, that Mr. Hosoda is not going to be the Speaker of the House in the extraordinary Diet session that starts in 6 days on Friday. And he is going to resign his position, but he's going to maintain his badge as a member of the lower house. This is quite unusual because when the Speaker typically resigns, he resigns from Diet politics. And in fact, when he announced his resignation as the Speaker, he said it's, health issues prevent me from continuing on. But when he announced that he was going to be resigning as the Speaker, he did say, but I'm going to stay as a member of the Parliament, and I'll probably run for election if there's another election for the lower house. What that created was this expectation that perhaps since he was the leader of the Abe faction previously, he became Speaker of the House, his power increased, he's resigning as Speaker of the House, he's going to maintain his Diet position, that perhaps he's going to go back to the Abe faction and solve this leadership problem. So they've been struggling ever since the Prime Minister was assassinated with who is going to be the titular head. They've gone through lots of different combinations and machinations, and it's very, very contentious. And as a consequence of that, the Abe faction has declined. It just hasn't been able to really maximize the power that it has, having the largest number, almost twice as large as the next largest LDP faction, to maximize that power because they don't have a single voice, a single leader who can speak on behalf of the Abe faction. So the expectation was perhaps Mr. Hosoda will come back and he'll be the leader. As a placeholder, it really makes a lot of sense. I liked the idea when I first was considering what might happen with him since he was going to keep his badge. But he had a press conference on Thursday, and it looks like it doesn't really make that much sense. In the press conference, you can see that he's a little bit older and feebler. It looks like probably it was a good call for him to resign as Speaker of the House, but to come back into a power position probably it doesn't resonate very much. But worse than that is this attack on him personally about his connections with the Unification Church. So as the Unification Church begins to mount, the government, the culture ministry is insisting that their religious status be revoked. They are no longer a church. They don't have tax status anymore. And the monies that they receive are not 100% collected by the church for services, for whatever the church does in supporting their constituency or Japanese society in general. With that withdrawn, and since Mr. Hosoda was the leader of the Abe faction throughout the Abe administration, and since the Abe faction was the one faction that was most instrumental in supporting the Unification Church, which kind of is why Mr. Abe was assassinated in the first place, that all became exposed as a consequence of the assassination. But it looks like Mr. Hosoda is deeply implicated in that. And during the question and answer period, it was a little bit of dancing and delicate. I can. This is as much as I can say about that. The other kind of irritating thing is, you might recall that Mr. Motegi insisted, in order to quell public concern about the LDP and the Unification Church, he insisted that every member of the LDP provide a one-page document that said what their relationship was with the Unification Church, and that they committed that they were distancing themselves, that any connections would be removed, and everybody needed to submit that document, or they would lose their status as an LDP member. And so, of course, there was wide participation in that, a probably unanimous participation in that. There were two people that were removed from that obligation, and one was the Speaker of the House and the other was the President of the Senate. And the Speaker of the House at that time was Mr. Hosoda. So now that he is no longer going to be the Speaker of the House, the knives are out about what, in fact, you were doing as the leader of the Abe faction during this period when the Unification Church was becoming so active. So it's a big deal for the Speaker of the House. It is unsure who the Prime Minister will select as the next Speaker. It's going to be very important. We'll know this by Friday of next week, because that's when the extraordinary diet session will be held. I think we'll probably hear it in the next couple of days, but who the Prime Minister selects and who is approved by the lower house is going to be really important for LDP dynamics and what the Prime Minister is intending to do, particularly in light of the fact that the Prime Minister, I mentioned the canary in his mouth and him grinning, that idiomatic phrase is meant that he's got something that he's holding back. He's ready to enjoy it, but only exclusive to everybody else. He knows something not everybody else knows. And through the next week, he has actually, for the last couple of weeks, he has talked about this dynamic change that Japan will go through, and that the economy will go up, and he will begin this virtuous cycle of investment and wage growth, and the economy will take off, and people will be happy, and they'll start having children, and he'll be spending money on these various projects that he has been touting over the last 6 months. So it's a lot of words, but people are very curious to find out what actually is happening. So that is why the Prime Minister has decided, and the LDP decided, that he will open the extraordinary diet session on Friday. Then they have a 2-day weekend, one of which is the election day. So on Friday, he will keep his powder dry until Friday. He will open the diet session, and he will have a speech, and he will talk about all of the beautiful things that he's going to do. Not enough time to put the meat to the bones, like how he's going to do it, and how the tax rates and how the investments are going to benefit people in the economy at large. So people are really waiting for that. And just as an aside, you probably know that when the diet opens up, the emperor comes in to actually open the diet. So he travels from the palace, which is across the moat. He drives up the driveway, the circular driveway. The huge brass doors open up. The hillside is lined by members of the lower house. Once he enters the cabinet, the parliament proper, then the upper house members are lined. Everybody bows in unison as the emperor sometimes mounts the stairs. They have a red carpet that goes from his waiting room down to the car. More likely he will take the elevator, but who knows? And then he sits there while everybody collects into the upper house chamber, and then he opens the diet, and the Prime Minister will give a speech in the presence of the emperor. And this speech is going to be really critical. It's going to be critical for a couple of reasons. The most important of which is that there's 2 by-elections, one for the upper house, one for the lower house, on Sunday. So he wants to campaign, kind of, for these 2 candidates in the LDP who are running for those seats. The LDP held those seats. One was lost because of a death. The other was lost because of a scandal. The Diet member was abusive to his secretary. It was caught on film. He resigned as a consequence of that. And so this by-election is to fill that seat. The LDP had those seats in the past. It is almost certain that the LDP will get those seats, particularly following the prime minister's flowery speech that he's going to give, the day earlier or 2 days earlier. So we can anticipate the LDP taking those 2 seats. It has been touted as a kind of referendum. The prime minister is doing great. And if the LDP wins these 2 seats, that means that the prime minister is doing a great job. Let's interpret it that way. That's not quite accurate. And one of the ideas for encouraging the prime minister to hold a snap election before the end of the year was, if the LDP does really well in these 2 elections, then it's wind in his sails. It's something that he can hang his hat on, and then he'll call a snap election. I don't think the public reads it that way. So let's address that when it comes up. So those are the issues that are hot on topic right now. I'd like to move into the Q&A, but there's probably a lot more that we can talk about. That one of the issues is the resignation of Munio Suzuki. Not the resignation, actually he was ejected from Ishin no Kai. And the reason why I want to talk about Munio Suzuki is because he was such a prominent member of the LDP. And he started one political party when he was kicked out of the LDP for a bribery scandal. And he started a new political party. He ran for that political party. He was the only person in that political party that won election. He came back to the lower house. He was ejected again because of this lawsuit. He was actually convicted. He and his aides were convicted. He contested that conviction. It went to the Supreme Court. He eventually was arrested. He spent time in prison. He came back. He ran for the proportional election district in Hokkaido for the upper house, and he won that. He won that under the auspices of Ishin. And so his history is just, he's been a firebrand and a good friend of Russia, the Soviet Union previously. There is a house in Kunashiri for the bilateral relationships between Russia and Japan built there. It's called the Munio House because it was built by funds that was generated by the foreign ministry under his leadership. So in Hokkaido, he is well known as the most prominent friend of Russia. So what happened was he decided to go to Russia last week, 2 weeks ago. And he told the Diet that he was going there, but he didn't tell Ishin until he was on the airplane. And then he reported to them, oh, by the way, I'm on the airplane to Moscow. I'm going to be visiting 5 days, and I just want to let you know so that there's no controversy that comes up. He went to Russia. He spoke on behalf of Japan-Russian relations, obviously. And he said, Russia is definitely going to win this conflict in Ukraine, and Japan stands behind, these relationships, and we want to bolster them, and we want, everybody to be friends again. He flew back, and he caught all sorts of hell for that. Munio Suzuki was a Diet member's secretary, and he was a Diet secretary when I was a Diet secretary. So I've known him for many years. He's really interesting because he was the Diet secretary for a very prominent member of Hokkaido at the time, who was so prominent, he actually ran for election as prime minister. And in this election, I was actually working in the parliament during this election. Nakasone eventually won the election, but there was 4 contenders for this election. Nakasone won the election. One of the contenders died of suicide. One of the contenders was the wealthiest member of parliament. He was arrested and convicted and kicked out of the Diet. And the other contender just disappeared into oblivion. So only Mr. Nakasone came out. This is tough politics. For these 4 contenders to go the distance to become prime minister and all three of them falling away into oblivion is really an interesting feature of maybe that time of Japanese politics, but of politics in general. Let me also tell you that when the member killed himself, it was the member in Hokkaido that Munio Suzuki worked for. And in fact, Munio Suzuki was the person who found the Diet member, dead in his hotel room. And he quickly moved in to absorb this member's supporters and voters, and he was going to run an election. And it turned out that Nakagawa's son decided he was going to do that instead. So Munio Suzuki took the next election district and ran for the lower house, and he won it. So there's a little bit of color that's going on there. And also the fact that he was so prominent and a prominent member of Ishin and going off on his own like that is somewhat startling. For the Ishin to kick him out and therefore their numbers decrease by one is a huge deal. But apparently they just couldn't contend with somebody like that, so prominent, challenging the leadership of Mr. Baba, who is the leader of Ishin, to do that. So now Mr. Suzuki is a free agent. He's a floater. He's still in the LDP. Also, the other interesting thing about Mr. Suzuki, he also hired a foreign diet secretary. So as you know, I was the first one. I opened the door for that. And several other members began to hire and recruit foreign. It's not a very big deal. I mean, it's a big deal, but it's not very popular among members of the parliament. But Munio Suzuki went out of his way and hired a fellow from, I think, Kenya. What was his name? He just died recently, but he was very prominent, kind of loud suits. And he was traveling with Munio Suzuki, sometimes as his driver, sometimes as his sidekick. But he was very popular in the news quite a bit too. So Japanese political history is very interesting, and it always goes around. So it pays dividends to learn who these people are, remember their names, because they never disappear unless it's like into oblivion. But also there are lessons of how Japanese politics works and what kind of rough and tumble world it is and how delicate it is. So it's always interesting to follow how that goes out. There are other things that we can talk about, but perhaps as the suggestions have been proposed to Maya, we try and keep the individual briefing very tight and short. And then those issues that we have been talking about, on Q&A, we can get into those if there are ones that are of more interest to you. I know a lot of people are interested in what's going on with Expo, also with the disparity between wages of men and women or the gender gap. We can get into those, but I just wanted to touch on those quickly and see if this kind of structure of the briefing works more for people, or if we go back and we actually extend the initial part of the briefing with a little bit more detail and depth and compress the Q&A. So let's try that for now. Maya, I'd like to turn it back over to you and open it up for questions and answers.
Yes, thank you very much. First, we have a question that was delivered to us at the end of the briefing last week, and it is about Osaka Expo. So the question is there going to be any impact on the IR, actually the integrated resorts, if the Osaka Expo is cancelled? Your thoughts on this, actually?
Okay, it's a great question, and yes, there's a lot going on there. So Yume no Shima is it's the name of a marina and a piece of land that was built by dumping soil and garbage and all sorts of things in Tokyo Harbor as well. There's a big marina there called Yume no Shima, but also in Osaka there is reclaimed land that is a man-made island called Yume no Shima as well. This is the site for the integrated resort that was the license, which was recognized and granted by the Japanese government last year. And so construction is going on there. They are going to have an integrated resort. It's going to occupy, the gambling part of it is going to occupy less than 3% of the entire site. but it's a huge site for weddings, for entertainment, for drama, for movie theaters, for restaurants. It's a huge operation. This is being funded somewhat by the central government and by the local government, but it's mostly the foreigners coming in to build this integrated resort. So that makes it a little bit different than what's going on with Expo. Expo is the national government and the Osaka prefectural government providing funds to create this massive international exposition that Osaka was successful in landing for 2025. So, like I said, we're almost a year and a half away from it opening, and there's only two countries that have agreed to open a pavilion. One is South Korea. Makes sense with the budding relationships between Japan and South Korea beginning to flourish, and they've done a poll between South Korea and Japan, and the appreciation of South Koreans towards Japan has increased incredibly, and similarly with Japanese towards the South Koreans, the relationship has been flourishing. So they're going to they've submitted the plans for their pavilion, and the second one to come in was Monaco. So Monaco, as you might or might not know, is according to GDP figures, the wealthiest country in the world. It has a lot of money invested there, a lot of funds based their headquarters there, a lot of crypto currencies are based there, it's just, I don't know, I don't want to say something pejoratively, but, initially it was a pirate enclave. So it continues to be one of those places. It's a nation unto itself. And as a consequence, it generates a lot of revenue. Their tax revenue is very favorable to people who come and invest there or to have their headquarters there. So, and there's a lot of wealth there, as the name Monaco just conjures up in your mind. So they're going to have a pavilion, but the Japanese government has not been very successful in encouraging others. So what happens with these other countries, and there are 50 pavilions that they had hoped individual countries would come, submit plans for, and build. So the money for building those pavilions comes from independent countries. The Japanese government supports the workers and the materials, but those are market prices that these countries are paying for that. And I think that's one of the reasons the price increase since they initially submitted the bid to host the expo when it was first floated, and the costs now have increased by more than 100%, similar to what happened with the Tokyo Olympics and similar to what happened in Sapporo. Sapporo said, no, we don't want to do that. We don't want to follow that path. The citizens don't appreciate the fact that we're going to host the Winter Olympics in Sapporo. So, Prime Minister, we withdraw our application. So that's going on there. We talked earlier about the bus drivers, about the truck drivers, the number of overtime work that the contractors, the construction workers can work is being forcibly reduced by the government to 120 hours per year. And the Japanese government is, well, actually, Osaka is saying, can't we get some sort of exemption, Mr. Prime Minister, so that we remain here just for the construction workers and maybe just for the expo, so that these construction workers can work longer hours. And there's a tension going on there that the labor unions are saying, hell no. The reason why it's being forcibly reduced is because the number of workers in the industry is being reduced. It's increasingly being reduced. And if you want more workers there, then offer higher wages rather than increasing the amount of work that individuals can accumulate, increasing their benefit by just working more hours. It doesn't make sense. Offer us more money per hour and more people will flood into the market, similar to bus drivers too. So the construction workers, it's suffering. It's one of those areas where the Japanese government is saying, let's bring in more South Koreans, more Vietnamese, more Malaysians to come in for this work visa that allows them to work in the 4K, the dirty, dangerous, low paying level of contractors or bus drivers or whatever, farmers, so that these foreigners can come in. So there's incredible tension there. And once again, it reflects on, this wage disparity between men and women. So there's a lot going on with the prime minister. His numbers continue to fall because he hasn't quite addressed that issue. So, sorry, it's a long answer to, is this situation with the expo going to impact the integrated resorts? And the answer is, it's a long-winded answer, I apologize for that, is likely no. The amount of money, the amount of money that is being devoted to the integrated resort is coming from a different source than the amount of money that is being devoted to the expo. So they will pay higher wages. They will attract more workers, probably robbing them from the expo workers. But that's how competition works. I love it when you keep your mic off. It gives me something to wag my finger at you.
Okay, apologies for that. Right. Okay, thank you for the answer. We have a couple of comments in Clubhouse. So one of them is from Gabor. And
Hey, Gabor.
He says, okay, let's see, just a moment. Okay. Well, it is interesting that shortly before his trip to Russia, 2 Fridays ago, Muneo Suzuki had a big party and Ishin leader Baba Sensei held a support speech for him.
Of course.
Imagine how bad he felt, blindsided by Muneo's travel plan. Yes.
Yep.
And also, this continues. Muneo is a very unique character. He must be the only politician who managed to get back to the Diet from prison. Right. And also to win elections, right? Because he has been winning election after election. So, yes. And then, so going now to the Osaka Expo topic, Gabor says, I think the Czech Republic has also applied for pavilion construction permit, though I'm not sure what type, A or B. Yeah, I think that there is some developments there recently, and probably more information will come out. But of course, it looks like the government, with everything happening in other fields of social life and politics, they don't want really to bring all these issues to light.
So before we drift off of that topic, it's true that the Czech Republic did submit architectural plans, but it's kind of in that zone of go, no go. So it's people are waiting for them to go past the go sign. So the Czech Republic has submitted architectural plans, but the current thinking now is we're dancing close to the edge of just canceling the expo. So let's not do that. Let's create another kind of category where countries can come in, and it's not the top class category where you come in and you have to build your pavilion. We want 50 pavilions built by various countries so that we, after the expo concludes, we have this huge site that can be used for years and years because companies and countries have come in to build these pavilions for us. So they're thinking of creating another one, a huge pavilion where different countries can come in and build like stalls or large portions that represent their countries, and they would have access to building that kind of segment there. But it's really going through a lot of consternation. It is not quite, it's a year and a half away. I would think it would be very difficult for them to cancel the expo. Ishin would look terrible. Osaka government would look terrible. Maybe even the national government would look terrible. And the prime minister really can't afford that right now with his approval rating dancing at 26%. So a lot of considerations going on there. Thank you, Gabor, for your insight.
Thank you. And Hiroko, she supplied the name of the second foreign secretary, Diet secretary. So the name is, probably you just, okay, it is Muwete Muluaka. So, and he passed away at the age of 62. That's what, that's the information Hiroko supplied.
Thank you very much. Just recently he passed away, God rest his soul. he was a long-term diet member secretary. So I was the first one. I wasn't there for 2 years. I didn't even exceed a 2-year term. But it was tough. It was tough there. I wrapped up. I wrote a book about the experience and went back to the United States to go to law school yet again. But following that, I think Munio's diet secretary was one of the longest serving foreign diet secretaries. So he was really at the vanguard.
Right, yes, he was indeed. And then, well, we have a couple of other questions as well. One of them is about the recent bill in Saitama Prefecture about,
Yes.
you know, well, that's the bill against leaving, yes, kids home alone. So reportedly, it was withdrawn
Yeah.
by the LDP. So what are the implications there? If you can give us a little bit of insight there as well. Just, I'm not sure whether we can talk in detail about this, but yeah, your thoughts on this.
So similar to what's going on in Hokkaido. So in Sapporo, the constituency told the administration, we don't want to host the Olympics here in 2030. We just don't want it. And so he had to kind of give up that. For him, it would have been great as the mayor of the city, but he had to bow to constituents' concerns. Similarly, with what's going on in Saitama, somebody came up with the idea that there have been too many instances where mom went shopping, she left the kid, or the most recent one was the whole family went shopping and they forgot the kid in the baby seat, and they went into shopping. I think it was to Costco, and they came back and the child was dead. It was in the summer heat. But it happens frequently enough where they go to pachinko, something like that happens, and they wanted to prevent that from happening. So they came up with this bill. It received a considerable amount of attention and support, but ultimately, when it came down to it, people are saying, "Look, what in the hell are you insisting that we take our kids wherever we go? We can't leave them at home. I can't go shopping when it's raining. I got to bundle up the kids. I got to take them with me. It's I don't have a car, and dragging these kids around with me. It's sometimes they're infants, but sometimes they're also 10-year-old kids who can take care of themselves. So hell no, take this one and put it in a dark place where the sun doesn't shine." So that's what came up this last week. And Maya, as you know, I'm speaking at a Benkyokai on Wednesday of this week, and an invitation went out to my contacts. If you're interested in how this process works and Benkyokai, how the citizenry becomes engaged with members of the parliament, that's what the Benkyokai allows the citizens to do. And so I opened it up. I think a lot of people who are regular Japan hands, number one, haven't been into the parliament itself, and we created an opportunity to do that through your good offices, but also to see how the political process works at a more grassroots level, and that is at the Benkyokai. So entering into a Benkyokai, you need to have an invitation, you need to know who the member is, you need to disclose who you are. You just can't walk in and show up. They're closed to the press. It's not for attribution. So we opened up that opportunity for members of this group as well. So if you're interested, please let Maya or me know on a Wednesday morning briefing. But it's trying to reveal to you, the audience, how Japanese policy is actually formed and how it's created. And as Saitama kind of relays and reemphasizes, is that the Japanese citizenry, it's not just top down. It's not just the LDP, dictating how things go, or who is the biggest faction in LDP politics to dictate that there's going to be an integrated resort, and that's the law that we want. The Japanese have a mechanism, and they have a huge voice in how that happens. The prime minister is dealing with that right now with his approval rating at 26%. And you watch it on Friday when he makes his speech inside the Diet. It's going to be full of flowers and gifts, and everybody's going to love him. And the two members of the LDP that are running for the upper house and lower house on Sunday will win. I don't know by a landslide, but I think probably a lot of people just won't show up to vote because it's such an obvious choice. But that's what the prime minister is dealing with now, and that's how the citizenry are frequently able to participate in that process.
Yes, thank you very much. Just another comment about Muneo Suzuki here in Clubhouse. So Muneo Suzuki had made trouble from past as a multi-direction for the self-income and social stance. It's just a promotion. Go with immoral and egotistic policy. This comes from Mr. Tori. So yes, there are well, a lot of things associated with Muneo Suzuki in the past.
So yes, it takes somebody like Mr. Tori. I don't know who Tori is, but thank you for joining the briefing and for your comments. So for the Japanese, Muneo he's really on the outside of what is acceptable for what a member of parliament should be doing. He's so vociferous about his positions, and a lot of people just don't like him. They don't like that style. And in fact, when the body was found of his boss, he was the number one secretary. He found Mr. Nakagawa and untied him from the shower rack where he hung himself. There was so much controversy there. It was such a shocking thing that this fellow, what a handsome, what a really a great politician he was, to kill himself. A lot of scandal rags came up and said it wasn't suicide. It must have been murder. And who shows up but Muneo Suzuki? He's the one that found the body, and now he's going to run for parliament. And he's always had his eye on being a parliamentarian, not a secretary. So there's a lot of that kind of thing that swirls around a figure like Muneo Suzuki. But boy, he never fails to produce, does he? So thank you very much for that insight and that commentary.
Well, thank you, Timothy, for yes, and Yoshitaka Tori-san, thank you very much. Okay, and we have Yuka here in Clubhouse with us on stage. Yuka, hello.
Hi,
to
Yuka.
you.
Hey, it's been a while.
It has.
I
yes.
forgot how much I've enjoyed this session. Thank you.
You have been studying and getting all sorts of things done, haven't you?
Yeah. Actually, I have like a 2.5 question. The first question is super easy. You know, the Benkyokai you just mentioned, you have to be at the premise?
Yes.
Is there nothing online?
Nothing online. And all of these Benkyokai are like that. I don't know any Benkyokai that is it is virtual. They are all about developing a personal relationship and skinship and showing up in person.
Yeah. Next voters? Okay.
You don't have to be a voter. You know, I'm not a Japanese citizen, so I don't vote. But I do get invited. There are a lot of politicians that I'm close to, and I join their Benkyokai. And if somebody in the audience says, look, I can't go on Wednesday, I would like to go to one, please let me know the next one you're going to. You can arrange it, but it does require a getting past the gatekeeper.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So the 0.5 question was done. So the second question I just mentioned about, actually I happened to be in Japan when the treated water was released from Fukushima for the first time. And so I saw on the news, seems like a Hokkaido, the fisherman was really on the uproar. I didn't know this, but the 100% of Hokkaido shellfish was going to China. And then China is now banning the Japanese fish. I mean, the imported one, 100%. Is this been going on? And then also, like I just heard, in South Korea, and you just mentioned, on the country basis, relationship between two countries are substantially improving. However, the Korean citizens were surveyed, and 70% of them said the very anti, those releasing of distributed water. So, do you have any update on this front? Are they going to do the second release?
So, the release is continuous. It's not a first release and a second release. It's a continuous release that will continue, are you ready? Beyond 30 years. this release is continuing, and it will continue for 30 years at least. With regard to the foodstuffs, so Hokkaido is, anybody that's been to Hokkaido, Maya, you used to live there, right?
I lived there, yes.
The food, the seafood there is just extraordinary, and the size of the scallops, hotate, is just enormous and so luscious, and just it's so fantastic. And yes, the Hokkaido Fishery Association is suffering tremendously, more than any other prefecture, because almost all of their hotate was going to China. And it kind of makes sense, because hotate, in order to harvest it, it requires a lot of manual labor to kind of husk the shell and can the product. So it being going to China is kind of, I mean, China is Japan's largest trade partner, and like you said, almost 100% of Hokkaido's food stock or fish stock was going to China. It's completely cut off. They had a food fair in England just this last weekend where the Jetro was promoting Japanese hotate, and so they need to have these other markets. Japan, the EU, and England have decided to reduce the trade restrictions on product coming from Fukushima and surrounding prefectures. They had a ban on it until just recently, maybe 5 months ago, and they dropped that ban in anticipation of what potentially could happen when they began to release this water, and maybe China is going to retaliate somehow. So they've been preparing for this, and now the hotate is seeking other markets in the EU and in England and in the United States and in South America. So the Japanese government is behind this. They're promoting it. They're spending a lot of money in it. They've earmarked billions of yen to promote and also to pay the fisheries for the diminution in revenue that they are going to have. But they're going into the EU and to England, and they interviewed some of the people who were tasting it. They said, this is really nice. It's got a very a special kind of flavor. But, you know, we have our own industry here. We have, you know, mussels and scallops here that are doing quite well. But these ones from Hokkaido are really delicious. So the way that the Japanese are going to go in there is they've got to reduce the prices below the prices that are being offered by the indigenous and local market. So it's potentially going to cause some trade friction, or maybe they keep the prices at the same level, and the diminution of the prices from Japan are supplemented by the Japanese government. I don't know, but yes, it's a very serious deal that the Chinese have withdrawn 100%. Not just the fish stocks, but also many of the fruits and vegetables as well.
You know, if
That's
I see, you know,
1.5.
yeah, show fashion, any fit from Hokkaido, from any Japan, like I will, you know, like buy them in a heartbeat. But anyway, okay. So that third question is going to be a weird one, and then, you know, nothing new from me, but I hope you're ready for this. So, you know, again, you know, I spent like an enormous amount of time watching NHK when I was in Japan this summer. And then it was quite interesting. And then on Sunday morning, you know, they're just like here, there's a politician, those round table.
That's right. Early.
Huh?
Early in the morning.
Yeah.
On Sundays, yeah.
There was a quite, you know, prominent politicians were invited, but, you know, the one didn't say anything in detail that anything with meat. However, what I want to ask you is, though, one of those politicians was transvestite, I think. She was he, and then I was surprised, and I was actually pleased to see Japanese elected him or her. You know what I'm talking about? Do you know who I'm talking about?
I don't know. I didn't catch that particular show. But go ahead.
New? No, I think it's kind of unusual for Japanese to do so, right? I mean, this is a country where the female politicians were rare, and then now they're sort of, you know, like those people, you know, like, I don't know how to say this politically correctly, but like I thought it was incredibly great of Japanese to sort of, they elect those people. That's okay. And I don't know where I'm going on this question, but I just wanted to share that, I was pleased with that person was on the show.
Well, some foreigners who visit Japan, and they're not long-term residents, but they come here for 6 months or a year, or maybe they're not that engaged with Japanese television because of the language barrier and that sort of thing. But there are a lot of very famous actors who sell products who appear to be women, unless you know the story that they're actually men dressed up as women, right? There are a couple of very prominent ones that do a very good job on selling all sorts of things, cosmetics and foodstuffs and that sort of thing. So we had a little bit of a talk maybe 2 weeks ago about religion in Japan and the kind of ambivalence or the flexibility of the Japanese towards religion. But I think there's also this kind of ambivalence and this flexibility towards sexual selection too. I think, I don't know, but it appears to be more prominent in the United States, but it is here. It's also in, for example, Thailand, you see a lot of boy girls. So this politician, I've got to guess, is from the upper house, because the upper house election for 6 years, prominently from a national election base. Yeah, it is foreseeable that somebody could be elected, probably as a consequence, not of their sexual orientation, but of something in addition to that. For example, writing a book about their experience, or being a performer or some sort of a celebrity, and that attracts votes as well. But yes, the upper house seems to be that collection of those kinds of people. So it's held in some disdain by the lower house, because they're saying we really work for the people, and you guys, you just write a book, or you're famous as a singer or something like that, and people elect you because you have name recognition, but you have no qualities, no political qualities. You're not seeped in politics like we are. So there's always that tension that goes on there. So it's no surprise. But if you'd like me to get into it next week, I'll do a little bit of looking into who this politician was and what their positions are.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for handling my question very well. I know it wasn't your typical question that, your typical more intelligent question, but she was beautiful. She is, probably still is beautiful, but she looked very feminine, much more so than I am. So yeah, anyway, I'm going to end with this comment. Thank you.
You should run for office.
Yeah, let me think about that.
Good.
Yes. Well, thank you, Yuka. And Gabor, I sent you an invite to come up on stage. I'm not sure that you can see it. So if you can see it, and if you come up and join us, please do. And then there is one more last question that is actually left from last week's. And it comes about the impact of the conflict in the Middle East on Japanese politics. So, and it is from Mario. So if you can comment on that briefly, or
yeah, I don't think I touched upon it in my top lineup of topics today, but it is very interesting what's going on. My office, by the way, is in Yotsuya. The neighborhood is called Rokubancho, and the Israeli embassy is very close to there. It's over by the Globus University. And they had a tremendous demonstration on Friday of Palestinians collected in front of the Israeli embassy. It's usually a quiet neighborhood, not much going on there, but boy, was it packed. Maybe 1,000 people were protesting there, clogging up traffic and causing a scene, as it was designed to do. The situation between Gaza and Israel, from the perspective of the current prime minister and the LDP, is very complex and tenuous. And the reason why is because Japan is the head of the G7 this year. We hosted in Hiroshima the G7 the prime minister is very prominent in pushing Japan to be the leader diplomatically and being the voice of reason for a rules-based political economy throughout the world. So he's really pushing that. And they signed a letter just this last week, I think on Monday, condemning Hamas and supporting Israel. And this letter was signed by 5 of the 7 G7 members. Prominently, Japan withheld signing and endorsing that. The other one was Canada, but there are different reasons why Canada didn't sign that agreement. But for Japan, as the leader of the G7, to not be kind of at the forefront and coalescing the G7 to be the standard bearer, it was somewhat remarkable. But it goes back to, Japan had recognized Palestine in 1975. There's a statement that the LDP has followed the Nikaido position on the recognition of Palestine and their ability to coexist with the state of Israel. And that was in 1975. That stance has continued even to today. So they are very, very friendly with Israel. As you know, the economy, the trade, the diplomatic and the military exchanges going on between Israel and Japan is very robust. Japan and Israel are very good friends, but Japan also supports the Palestinians and has always been very good to them. The Prime Minister Abe visited the Palestinian leaders when he visited the Middle East. I think this was in 2015 or so. And so there has been this relationship in supporting them and trying to keep things calm. So Japan is in a bit of a pickle now because it needs to, either be the peacemaker and probably preserve itself as eventually, when Israel and the passions die down a little bit, there needs to be some sort of a recognition of the Palestinians in some form or shape. And I guess the prime minister is holding himself out to be that kind of peacemaker. But the position of Japan is once again a little bit ambivalent. It doesn't want to support Israel in attacking Gaza and Hamas, and it doesn't want to be completely ignorant of the fact that Hamas and the Palestine or Hamas attacked Israel in this fight. But all over the world, you can see that there are a lot of people that are supporting the Palestinians' right to exist, and even in light of what Hamas did, that they are supporting them. There are riots, there are protestations throughout the world. So it is a complex issue, and not everything, as in Ukraine, as in a lot of issues that we deal with, not everything is as it appears on the surface. And we are all manipulated by, press reports and how people portray certain issues. So one needs to be a little bit careful about leaping to conclusions or knee-jerk reactions. And I think that pretty much describes the current prime minister's position on that issue. So you can expect Japan to be at the forefront of humanitarian aid, and also in a position of being a broker of peace when eventually that situation comes up. The foreign minister has been in very close communications over this last week with Jordan and with Saudi Arabia with regard to how to deal with this issue. So Japan wants to be at the forefront of that. And that probably describes why the prime minister took the stance that he did, not signing that letter of the other G7 members. But a lot will be revealed this week. Maybe, I kind of doubt it, but maybe the prime minister will touch upon it in his speech on Friday. I think his speech on Friday is going to be more geared toward the economy, how he's going to help it, how he's going to create this virtuous circle of wage increases and investment opportunities, and kick off this engine of growth for Japan. Maya?
Oh yes, thank you. Okay, and we have Gabor and David join us in Clubhouse. So Gabor, I hope that you can hear you.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you for coming up. Yuka, thank you for your assistance. Very much appreciated, as always.
Thank you. for taking the trouble to get me on stage. Good morning. And
Good morning.
I can't. Good morning. Thanks, Tim. I can't wait to see again. Take my family to see your white beast on and all these beautiful cars on Sunday. It's an amazing car. I imagine the other ones are true beauties as well.
Yeah, you should bring your family out to Yokohama. It's almost always a nice sunny day. The cars are on the promenade from maybe 8 o'clock to 3 o'clock. And there are lots of restaurants there, as you know. They've refurbished the tax warehouse, and it's a nice gentrified kind of place. But it's a good place. You know, more than 4,000 people visited the cars last year, so it's a nice event for the family.
I saw the pictures from last year, and I'm so sad I missed it.
Cool cars, yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, it's cool cars. Yeah. Muneo, thanks for speaking about Muneo. He's really a unique guy, and we forgot to mention that when he was prosecuted and kicked out of the Diet, lost the Diet seat, and he made his own one-man party. He took his own daughter and fielded her, and her daughter had an interesting career. And now she's Suzuki Takako. She's in the LDP now, but she used to be in the DPJ and all over. And just recently, she was Vice Minister for Foreign Affairs. And so it's a very interesting family feature of Muneo. And even though he was, now last time he was in Ishin, but before he was Daiichi Nippon, I forgot the party name, but it doesn't matter because it was Muneo party. He was said to be a close aide to Prime Minister Abe. They consulted very often on Russian policy, and he was said to be one of the major key guys, major architects in Abe's engagement Russia policy. So he's really a colorful guy and so remarkable. I can't remember anyone making a comeback from the prison in Japanese politics. You know, as you mentioned, a lot of people just disappear.
Yeah.
And he didn't.
Yeah, this reflection on Mr. Abe and Muneo Suzuki's assistance there. You know, the Prime Minister Abe met with Putin more than 23 times. You know, gave him an Akita dog, right? The relationship between the two under Abe was really beginning to grow. The Prime Minister was really hell-bent on resolving this issue with the four territories, the four islands in the Northern Territories. Muneo was the minister for the Northern Territories and Okinawa, as you might recall. That was during the Obuchi administration. And, you know, when you talk about, you know, Muneo Suzuki, and the circle just continues. You know, Muneo Suzuki was the minister for Northern Territories in Okinawa during the Obuchi administration. Mr. Obuchi died in office, and then Mr. Mori became prime minister. And now Miss Obuchi, his daughter, is the election campaign strategist within the LDP. So the fact that he visited Moscow, he did it kind of under the cover. You know, it is strange that he did have a party, and Mr. Baba was there on the podium and spoke on his behalf, and Muneo collected a lot of, you know, political funds for Ishin, and then he kind of pulled this trick. It's not good politics, and he suffered as a result of it. But yes, his central participation in Japan Russia relations you can't avoid it, and there are people that like him and people that hate him, but he's got a huge career, a very colorful career, as you pointed out. Like a firebrand, you know, he says things. He's very forceful in his selection of words and his body language. Even though he's a short guy, always a green tie. He's just a real character, and probably Japanese politics could use more people like him, I think.
Oh yeah, yes.
Yes, definitely.
And one more. Can I add one more funny thing?
Oh, please.
And, Baba Sensei had a very warm speech supporting Muneo just before he went to Russia, and then, as you said, he was expelled. And Baba Sensei is from Sakai. It's close to just neighboring Osaka, and he's a big Hanshin Tigers fan.
Yep.
Of course. I couldn't win a seat being a Giants fan in that area, I guess. And and he said, this year the Tigers won the Central League in 18 years drought. Last time the Tigers won the Central League was 2005 and 2003. And the funny thing that Baba Sensei mentioned that the last two times the Tigers won the league title, the diet was dissolved and there was a snap election. So he made this funny parallel that when the Tigers win the Central League Championship, lower house members lose their job and have to face election. I'm not sure this analogy works, but it was just funny.
I subscribe it to the fact that they threw Colonel Sanders into the river. And so they have the Colonel Sanders, the pall over the country because they threw Colonel Sanders during that last victory. But also, as you're talking about, personal things, I first met Baba through his father when his dad brought Baba into the election campaign headquarters of Nakayama when he was running for the lower house seat in Sakai. And I was working on the election campaign for my boss, who was Nakayama Taro, who had resigned from the upper house to run for this seat in the lower house. And Baba's dad brought him into the election campaign headquarters. He says, look, my son doesn't know much about what's going on. He's a young kid. So Sensei, would you please insert him somehow into your campaign office and, show him how the work is done. And he was assigned to this very small group, which I was on. And so we got to know each other very well. And this was a long time ago. So we've remained friends ever since then. So it's really interesting and great to see that he has risen to the top of, Ishin. So interesting how history and politics and personalities just conspire to generate just a real wealth of, insight and, excitement about what's going on in Japanese politics.
Yes.
Well, thank you, Gabor.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Gabor.
And David, good morning. Thank you for coming up on stage. You're on mute at the moment.
Which David is this?
David Malitz.
Hello, David.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thanks so much for having me. And maybe let me start by saying, because you started the session with it, I really enjoyed the longer briefings, actually, because often you don't know what you don't know, right? So all the anecdotes and background can be quite interesting, what Timothy has to share.
Thank you. Thank you for the feedback. Yes.
David, you have more to say, right?
Yeah. So my main question.
Okay, let me respond to that first, if you don't mind.
Yep.
Okay, so when we do this show, we film it live, and it goes live at 8:20 on LinkedIn, and we also simulcast it on Clubhouse. And Maya takes it, and I think it's live uploaded to YouTube as well. And I think the vast majority of our audience is on YouTube. We can't calibrate it very much, but I think a lot of people would, we've heard from, just the brief survey that Maya's done, a lot more people would join this meeting live when it was live if it wasn't at 8:20 on a Sunday morning, because it's just difficult. You got to feed the kids, you got other things that are going on. But we have a really tremendous global audience. And people are saying, yes, we get both ways. I prefer the longer format or the shorter format, but people really need some sort of consistency on how much time they're going to devote to it. And a lot of people just tune in to the briefing and not the Q&A. But I think even as this briefing reveals to us, that a lot of the heat and light is developed in the Q&A. But, you know, it's kind of insignificant if you leave out the briefing part too. So we're kind of conflicted about which is the best way to go. And that's why Maya conducted that survey. So I appreciate your input there.
Oh, okay, got it. So let me then add some heat as well. So actually what I wanted to ask about was the Japanese response to the terror attack by Hamas and the Israeli response to that. And okay, so you provided already a very interesting explanation to that. So two follow-up questions, if I may.
Sure.
So first, Indonesia, Malaysia, Brunei, that's 3 out of 10 countries of ASEAN, right? And they are very, very pro-Palestinian. Do these considerations, did those considerations play a role as well? Because obviously Japan is very interested in increasing influence and good relations with ASEAN, giving the competition with China. So that's the first question. And the second one is, so you mentioned that 7 statement, right? But then a couple of days afterwards, Japan in a way fell in line, right? Yeah. The foreign minister has become much, much stronger. And I first saw that in the statement on the 12th when she visited Thailand, right? So there she actually talks about terrorism, a word that has previously been avoided, and she used the same wording even in a phone call, I believe, with Qatar, who are one of the main funders of Hamas, I believe. And so an interesting detail here pointed out to me is that all happened after a phone call with United Arab Emirates, and they came out very, very strongly from the very beginning. So I'm just wondering, do you have any insights, any knowledge about, well, how the puzzle pieces come together? Was, well, a friendly call from the US embassy. There was also the demonstration, I guess, in Shibuya, where the US ambassador made straightforward statements about the US stance as well. That's it. Thank you.
When was this Shibuya demonstration where Rahm Emanuel spoke?
I think it was Wednesday.
Okay, I heard that there was a demonstration. I didn't know that he had spoken there. So let me address your first issue about Malaysia and the largely Muslim nations that are part of the G20. And the fact that the Japanese government wasn't very explicit in the first couple of days, and I think it's representative. Number one, Kamikawa, the foreign minister Kamikawa, is new at the job, and I think it just takes a little bit of time for the Japanese government to form what their response is going to be, and they're in a delicate position because they have acknowledged Palestine and they're supporting Israel, and this issue for let's have a joint statement, G7, let's have a joint statement. And I think with the prime minister, if he is not going to be the person leading that and coalescing those forces, yeah, he doesn't, somebody else takes the charge on that, but I'm not going to do it. I think it was too early for him. He didn't have enough information, and maybe he didn't want to be as so out in front on such a hot issue as this one. So it did take a couple of days, and I think the consideration based on the comments that you just made with Qatar and with Jordan and Ms. Kamikawa, her public statements and the negotiations that are going on there, all is based on oil and energy resources. And so it's the Arab nations that really control that. And, Japan is friendly with Iran. It is importing oil from Iran as well, from Russia. Japan is in a very, very delicate position. Even though there are sanctions against Russia because of the invasion of Ukraine, there are still business relationships. They're still importing, the gas from Sakhalin. Japan is in a very unique position, and the trade balance, largely depends on with the yen dollar disparity there. They're paying more for the imported oil and gas reserves that they get. So they're increasingly at a difficult position. And should something happen, should there be a blockade, or should the like-minded countries that are against China and against Russia and maybe now against Palestine, they suffer repercussions from the oil countries. Japan doesn't want to be a part of that. So I think that that's one of the considerations, that weighs heavily on the mind of the prime minister, that we're dancing a delicate line here. And even if it's Russia, we're still going to trade with them. And because of Palestine and they're being supported by all of these oil producing countries, we might want to be toned down a little bit here because, it wasn't very long ago where people were standing in line just for toilet paper. So we can't have that. And my approval rating is at 26, and very few prime ministers can survive very long at that rate. And I want to be prime minister again. I want to succeed. I want to exceed whatever Shinzo Abe was doing. He was the prime minister, collectively, 11 years. So I want to do something better. That he wants to stay prime minister, obviously. I think that explains it largely to a T, why Japan is being so delicate about how they address it. They did come around, like you said, because just the backlash and the videos that are coming up, you did need to make a strong statement about this attack on civilians. But I think the Japanese response was a bit tempered, as you point out. Great observations.
Okay. Great.
Anything else, David?
No, thanks. That's all for me.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Hiroko, thank you very much for telling us that you would like to join us this Wednesday for the Benkyokai. But next time, yes, because, yes. Okay, Hiroko-san, she has a schedule conflict, so next time.
Oh, that's too bad. Okay.
Yes, that's too bad, but we'll keep you posted about other opportunities. So, and I'm actually very much looking forward to seeing you, eventually meeting you in person. Yes. Okay. So it looks like we have finished the questions and. Okay. So there is just okay. Oh, Gerard.
You always do this to me. You always tease me. You say, "So we're finished now, but I have 2 more questions."
Oh, yes. So Gerard said, okay, he wrote, I'm watching live on YouTube this morning so I can see your faces too. Thank you, Gerard,
Lovely.
for doing that.
Thank you, Jared.
From Tom-san, politics makes strange bedfellows, which is the same as saying my stance is whatever is politically expedient and monetarily beneficial.
That's right. That's politics.
Well, that's it. That's politics. Okay. And Mario, thank you very much for being with us this morning. To everybody who watched us on all the channels we are on at the moment, it has been a pleasure delivering this briefing to you. Timothy, yes, it's the end of today's briefing so that you can be released and go about your day the way you please. Thanks a lot again for being here and enduring. I know it's not easy for you, but well, it's very much appreciated. Okay, that's all. Okay, show your best smile, Timothy. We are ending the live now.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Maya.
Thank you.